What you're about to see is how we took 3 existing enterprise systems already running in production today and turned them into something an AI agent can safely operate against end to end without needing to change the underlying infrastructure. This story is all about enablement, getting your existing systems ready for safe, secure and valuable agentic use cases. The use case in question today is portfolio risk monitoring. The first challenge that we faced was that one of the systems, the positions system, didn't have any clean OpenAPI documentation. Instead, what we have is a PDF with some endpoint descriptions and a collection of request response traces captured from production data. This is incredibly common in enterprises that we work with, but thanks to the Jentic platform, you don't actually need to start with well-documented APIs. We can take whatever context you have, feed it into the platform, and get agent-ready API descriptions out the other side. So to do this, we'll select those raw materials, give the API document a name and a description, and we'll kick off this process to design an API. Under the hood, Jentic reads the traces, infers the schema, resolves any inconsistencies, and then produces a spec that accurately describes what the API actually does, not just what somebody once wrote in a wiki or buried in a Confluence page. This is a crucial step because without a well-documented API, this system isn't something an agent can actually interact with, and governance is almost impossible. Once that process is complete, the output is a clean OpenAPI spec that describes our underlying positions portfolio system. This is now something both humans and agents can work with. Having a spec is one thing, however, not all API specs are actually created equal. An API can be technically valid and viable for a human user, but completely unusable for an AI agent. Missing descriptions, no examples, ambiguous error responses all result in poor agent usability. So let's take a look at a different API, the one that provides access to the risk management system. This is one the customer already had created, so let's see how ready it actually is for agentic consumption. I'll upload the file to the OpenAPI scoring algorithm and it will kick off our Agentic AI Readiness Framework scoring engine. The API gets evaluated across 6 different dimensions: foundational compliance, developer experience, tooling compatibility, AI readiness, and agent experience, as well as agent usability, security and governance, and AI discoverability. You can see that this API actually scores 0 out of 100. That dramatic score is largely because this API scores a 0 on AI discoverability. In the overview section below, you can see the full dimension breakdown. This API actually scores really well on foundational compliance, but there's a clear room for improvement when it comes to things like AI readiness and agent experience, and of course, agent discoverability. You can drill down into each of these dimensions to see specific signals so you know exactly what your API is lacking. The good news is that using the Jentic improvement engine, we can fix all of these issues automatically. Here, the platform reads the diagnostics, applies some targeted improvements, adding response schemas, standardizing operations, and documenting error formats, and then it rescores. Every improvement that you see here is specific and auditable. You can see that we've gone from a 0 up to 82 out of 100, all without touching the underlying system, thanks to the improvement overlay that we've applied. I'll save this improved version, and I'll also repeat this scoring and improvement process for the other 2 systems before we create our agentic workflow. Now that we have 3 improved API specs for each of the different systems for our use case, the next step is to orchestrate them into a workflow that performs the actual risk check. Here I'll give Jentic a goal for the workflow. We'll say that for a given portfolio of equity positions, check each of the position's current market value against the fund's concentration limits and flag any breaches. We'll ask it to pull in positions from the book of record, fetch some live prices, and make sure that any position that exceeds 5% portfolio allocation is flagged. I'll also give it access to all of the APIs that we've just created, as well as the initial documentation that we had. Once the platform generates the workflow, we can expand it to see the full workflow visualized. Every step in the workflow maps to a real operation and a use case step based off the APIs that we've created during this enablement process. What makes this powerful is that it's a functional description of what the agent can do in a human-readable format. So a non-technical subject matter expert can look at this workflow, understand the logic, and verify that the agent is only performing capabilities that are well-defined and understood. From a risk management perspective and auditability point of view, that's exactly what you need. Full visibility into what the agent will do before it ever touches a live system. Now we can package everything into a toolkit, which is a deployable bundle of APIs and workflows that an agent can consume inside a single unit. This is the unit that gives you governance and oversight to successfully roll out agents across your organizations. So we'll start by adding a toolkit and giving it a name. We'll give a description for what the toolkit can do. And then we'll just select the improved APIs that we created along the way, along with the workflow, and give the toolkit access to all of these capabilities. And that's it. 3 APIs, 1 workflow, all bundled and versioned, and this is exactly what gets promoted to production. But first, we need to validate it. When the toolkit is built, the platform automatically stands up a sandbox environment, which has mocked endpoints for every API and workflow in the toolkit, all running from the specs without any need to connect live systems, so nothing can cause any harm. But here's what makes this powerful for development. We can expose this entire sandbox as either a REST API or MCP server, so that an agent can explore and interact with the toolkit before it ever touches production systems. This gives us a connection URL and an auth token. Any agent then, whether it's an internal copilot or a development agent, can connect to this sandbox and interact with all 3 APIs through the workflow, safely with full observability. It's how you let your teams develop against your agentic capabilities without opening up real systems. So the toolkit is created, but before we promote this to production, we need to validate it formally. Let's run the toolkit against some structured evaluations. The platform has the sandbox mocks already running, so this means that we can test expected outcomes for both passing and failing scenarios. First, I'll generate some test cases automatically from the workflow and specs. Here, the platform generates scenarios that are based on the toolkit definition, the goals, and the rules set out by the workflow. You can also upload your own test cases from CSV and see how the agentic workflow performs against those scenarios. Here we have generated some breach scenarios and boundary conditions based off missing data, service failures, and exact threshold positions. So let's run a test case for that concentration brief, which we expect to fail, and see how it performs. Here it calls each of the operations based off that sandbox data, and there it is. Apple at 7.2% exceeds our 5% single name limit. And this was caught in the sandbox before any live systems were affected. The assertion passes, we expected a breach, and we got a breach. We can now go and run a full suite to ensure that every scenario produces the expected outcome. But once the toolkit is validated, our enablement phase is complete, and it's time to move this to production. So this is the handoff. We're moving the mocked endpoints to real production systems. When this gets promoted, we move across to a VPC deployment environment running on the customer's infrastructure. This deployed version of Jentic is what safely handles things like managed credentials for underlying systems, granular operation level permissions, full audit trail, and real-time monitoring. Everything an enterprise risk function needs before signing off on rolling this out across your organization. So the 3 APIs are validated, the workflow has been created, our test suite has passed with 0 unmitigated risks, and this toolkit is now production ready. From here, the governance layer takes over. So let's jump in.